Today's daf we're going to be learning is Chullin daf nun. We're going to get started from the end of yesterday's daf. Rav Nachman had pointed out, if you remember, we're up to the keva in the Mishnah. Remember, we're listing all the different treifa. We're going to get to some new ones today. And the keva is one of the four stomachs. And we're talking about the chalev that's on top of the keva, right? That we mentioned, if you remember, that Rav had said that there's two different kinds of chalev, the forbidden and the permitted. And the forbidden one, we said, is it doesn't stick as much. And the permitted one sticks. So because the permitted one sticks, it's able to seal up holes right? So on the keva, right, it can seal up the hole. So again, if it's chalev tahor, then it's sotem. If it's not tahor, it's not sotem. So we're going to talk, it's going to depend whether the chalev's kosher or not. So came Rav Nachman and said, or first Rav said in the name of Rav Nachman, I heard that Rav Nachman said there's two kinds of fats on the stomach. One is called the chimtza, one is called the bar chimtza. One seals and one doesn't, but I don't know which one. Came his son and said, it's the chimtza that doesn't seal, and the bar chimtza does seal. And then we have that siman, that yafer koach haben mikoach ha'av. Now we want to figure out, okay, so which of the fats is the chimtza, which is the bar chimtza, and we're going to talk about two different kinds of fats. Okay, we're going to call it the keshet, which is the bow, which is the rounded part on the bottom of the stomach. And then there's the top part, and then the top part, which is the yeter, which is like a bowstring, which is kind of flat at the top, and that's going to be the other one. So we're going to try to figure out which is which. Okay, so there's fats at the top and there's fats that are at the bottom under the rounded area. Tashma, so we're going to learn it from here. Rav Nachman talks about the fact that he says there's a difference of custom between Israel and the diaspora. Okay, this happens a lot where there's different customs that develop in different areas, and there's even a lot of differences between, certainly in those days when that was the main center was Israel and the other center was the diaspora, which is really Babylonia. There's even a book written in the Gaonic time period called Sefer Chilukim Ben Bnei Bavel v'Bnei Eretz Yisrael, something like that. I don't remember if I have the exact name, but it's this book of chilukim, difference of opinions, and it lists all these different machlokot that existed between the two places. So now I think if we tried to come up with a book with all the differences of opinion, right, it would be way longer than that list. But in those days, we could at least get it into a certain list of, all the things they disagreed about. So this is one of them. Inhu mechal achle, there's something that they eat. Ulididan mistam nami lo satim. Now, there's two ways you could read this. This is always the problem when you don't have punctuation. You could read this as a question, almost like a rhetorical question. Now, what he's saying is they eat it, we don't eat it. But now, if you don't eat it, what do we say? It's not so tame, right? The non-kosher chalev doesn't seal up a hole. But he says, Ulididan mistam nami lo satim. If we read it like Rashi, we're going to read it as what? And now we might be machmir and say you can't eat it, but are we going to go so far as to say it also doesn't seal up a hole? So he's saying basically, it sounds like he's saying, even we would agree though with the Israelite, people in Israel, that it would at least seal up a hole, even though we're more strict and we don't eat it. Okay, so even though normally those things go hand in hand, in this particular case, there's this fat on the stomach, which we're going to have to figure out in a minute which it is, because that didn't answer us what's chimtza bar chimtza. But what it's clear is there's one area of fats that even the Babylonians agree that it's going to seal up a hole, even though they won't eat it. So now we're going to talk about what area they're discussing here. So according to the first reading, the fat at the bottom of the bow, that for sure everyone agrees is forbidden, Babylonia and Israel. Ki pligi da'ayatra. The machloket is about the one that's at the top. It's like the bowstring, right? It's like a bow and arrow. They're saying it's like the shape of that rounded shape. That's the stomach. Ika da'amre. So before we get to the ika da'amre, so that's already it. So the machloket is about the ayatra. Now, so what does that mean? It means that the fat on the top there, now everyone agrees the bottom is forbidden. If the bottom is forbidden, everyone's going to agree it seals, right? So, it's forbidden, it won't seal. Okay, so the bottom clearly won't seal, and that's the chimtza. And the top, that the Babylonians might disagree and say you can't eat it, but they do think it seals. So the part at the top, the yeter, that's the part that we're going to say is the bar chimtza, which basically is going to seal. Okay? So there we got it. The second Ika d'Amre doesn't exactly work to determine what Rav Nachman said, according to Rashi. Okay? Ika d'Amre, diatra kol amalu pligi d'shari. Everyone agrees that the part at the top, instead of saying before there was a machloket whether it was permitted or not, everyone thinks it's permitted to eat. Even the Babylonians eat the top fat. Ki pligi da'akashta. Their machloket is about the bottom fat. Okay? The keshet, the one on the bow. Now, if that's the case, then actually, according to this, everyone agrees it's permitted. And if we read it like Rashi read it, the machloket's about the bottom, but even that would be sotem. In which case, all the fats are sotem, both the chimtza and the bar chimtza, and that doesn't allow us to figure out what Rav Nachman was thinking, because according to Rav Nachman, there was this distinction. So this reading doesn't really fit. Because again, according to Rav Nachman, there might be a differentiation between whether we can eat it or not, but if it can seal up a hole, for sure it can. So the way to read this, if you want to read it a different way, is that, and that's why I said it's all about the punctuation. When he, and I would say not just the punctuation, your tone of voice, which you really can't get when you're reading some words on paper. So the way Rashi read it was, but of course we're going to assume, right, the Babylonians think it can at least be sotem, even though they say we're going to be strict and we're not going to eat it, but we do think that it's the same consistency of the regular kosher fats, that it will seal a hole. But according to Tosfot, we read it literally. Okay, I'm going to read it again from the beginning. In hu mechal achle, they eat it, uledidan, and for us, not only do we not eat it, but mistam nami lo satim, we don't think that it seals a hole at all. Now, if you read it like that, then you're going to be able to explain. Because the keshet is the machloket, and there it's the chimtza, and the Babylonians think it's not so tame. Okay, this is all the way Tosfot reads it. And in this way, he can explain the second one, also explains his opinion. And the yeter, right, everyone agrees it's permitted, and it is so tame. So then you have you end up with the same conclusion. The yeter is the bar chimtza, which seals, and the keshet is the chimtza, which doesn't seal. Okay, so there was a way to even explain the second one is also going to tell you what's what. But anyway, that's a debate. Rashi and Tosfot how to read this Gemara. Okay, now we're going to continue along these lines since we were talking about this machloket Babylonians and people in Israel. They're going to say, and Rashi claims that this is talking about the first, according to the first version, ki hada amar, where basically we're going to say akash de kuli amalu pligida asr, that's forbidden, but we're talking about the ayatra. Now the ayatra, there's a machloket, and in Israel they would eat it, in Babylonia they wouldn't. But in Israel, ki hada amar Rav Avia amar Rabbi Ami was from Israel, mikamtzin. Now he says, you have to take off a little, like komets, remember the komets from Menachot, where you take a handful off? So out of your mincha offering, here you have to take a bit of a handful off. In other words, they don't allow the whole thing. They say take a bit of a handful off, and then you can eat the rest of the fat. Okay, so that's because they didn't think this was forbidden fat. V'chein amar Rabbi Yana mishum zaken echad, and Rabbi Yana also said in the name of an elder, mikamtzin. And Amar Rav Avia, Hava Kaimna Kamei de Rabbi Ami. I was before Rabbi Ami. Kimatsu v'havu leva achel. They took off this komets, and then they gave it to him, and he ate it. Now we're going to hear another story, though, where it's a little bit more complicated. Shamei de Rabbi Chanina, Hava Kai Kamei de Rabbi Chanina. So the shamash of Rabbi Chanina was before Rabbi Chanina. Just want to check one thing here for a second. Okay, so he was before Rabbi Chanina. And then Amar Leik, so Rabbi Chanina said to him, take off this handful so I can eat the rest of it. Havli de'echol, and give me the rest of it so I can eat it. And he saw that his shamash was hesitating, and he didn't really want to do it. So Amar Leik, he said to him, Bavlayat gum shade. He said, I get what your hesitation is. You're a Babylonian. Because you're a Babylonian, so then cut off the whole thing. Okay, because why? This goes back to what we've seen many times and we talked about recently. If your custom is to do one thing and you're in a place where there's a different custom, right, you have to keep your old custom, especially if it's a stringent custom, right? You're supposed to do chumrei makom shalach l'sham and chumrei makom sheyatzah misham. You're supposed to take on all the chumrot, both the place where you're from and the place where you go to. So he says, I get it. You're from Babylonia. You don't want to do this, so I understand. Okay, so there you see, this was a debate between the Babylonians and the people living in Israel. Tanya, okay, moving to another sugya. So we were talking here about what the fat can seal up a hole. So now we're moving on, and we got to this because we're talking about the fat on top of the keva, which was our topic, and the keva with the hole. Now we're jumping to the intestines, and we're going to talk about something that could seal up a hole in the intestines. And it's a specific approach of Rabban Shimon and Gamliel. And then we're going to have a whole question, do we actually hold like him or not? Tanya, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer, b'nei me'ayin shenikvu v'lechaso tamtam kshera. If your intestines had a hole, and there's a mucus, that we're going to talk about where this mucus comes from, there's a mucus kind of substance that covers it up, it's fine, it's kshera, it's not a treifa. My lecha, what mucus are we talking about? Amar Rav Kahana, shirka demaya denafik agav kuduchka. It's this mucus that's in the intestines that if you push a knife on it, right, you could press a knife down on the me'ayim and it will come out, right? If you ever try to, you have just thinking of when you do this, if you roast garlics and then you want to get it out, often you press down with a knife and it comes out, right? That's what we're talking about. If you push on the intestines, the mucus would come out and that would seal up a hole. Amar Rav Kahana, and then obviously make the animal not a treifa. Gemire chevraya de Rabbi Abba mi Rabbi Abba. So the friends of Rabbi Abba learned from Rabbi Abba. Umanu, who are these friends? Rabbi Zera. Okay, we mean the friend. Okay, it's actually the one friend. It's Rabbi Zera. Va'amrele, and some people have the opposite version. Chavraya de Rabbi Zera mi Rabbi Zera. Umanu Rabbi Abba. There was Rabbi Abba who heard it from Rabbi Zera. They were both third generation Amoraim in Israel. Makes sense that one was quoting the other. And then they said the following: Amar Rabbi Abba, Birei de Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Hachi Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, so we have Rabbi Abba, the son of Rabbi Chia bar Abba, quoting Rabbi Chia bar Abba, quoting Rabbi Yochanan. So it's tradition, but really dating back to Rabbi Yochanan. That's the important part. Whoever said it and said it to whoever. Halakha ke Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel b'treifa. The halakha is like Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel in the treifa case. And halakha Rabbi Shimon be'evel, and also in mourning practices. Okay, so let's try to figure out what we're talking about. Halakha Rabbi Shimon Gamliel b'treifa. When he said this, halakha is like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel b'treifa, he must have been talking about hadamaran, what we were just saying. Okay, so the halakha is like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel b'treifa means that if this mucus comes out and seals up a hole in the intestines, you're good. Ki Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel be'avel mahi, but what's the case in mourning? Ditna should be ditanya. It's a bright to the piers of Moed Katan, where the laws of Aveluk come up, of mourning. Now we have a situation where somebody comes home and finds out that someone in their family had died. Okay, they were away, and they come home and they find out that someone died, and they're in the middle of shiva. So what are the laws? What do? Do you start from the beginning? Do you just do shiva with everybody else? So we're going to see. It depends on a few things. Depends what day of shiva you got there, and it depends from how far are you coming, which is an interesting consideration. Okay, the consideration is going to be that if you were close by, you potentially could have been there even though you weren't, and therefore we're going to treat it as if you were there. If you come from far away, where there's no way you could have gotten there, then we're going to treat it as if you have to start from scratch, which is interesting in and of itself because it's really just potentially. You weren't there, you didn't hear. Okay, so that's what they're going to say. And it also depends on what day you showed up. So, Kosh L'Sha Yamim Arishonim, if you show up within the first 3 days, it's going to depend on this Makom Karov, Makom Rachok, how far you were at the time. So, Bami Makom Karov, if you're coming from close by, Monei Mahen, so you count together. In other words, since you could have potentially been there and you show up within the first 3 days, you just continue and sit shiva for the rest of the days. Mi Makom Rachok, Monei La'atzmo, but if you came from a distance, even if you showed up in the first few days, you have to start from the beginning. Mikam va'elach, but after the first 3 days you show up, it doesn't matter. Afilu bami makom karov moneh la'atzmo. You have to start from the beginning. You can't do, half a shiva. Rabbi Shimon omer, afilu, by the way, it's not exactly half. It's just the first 3 days have a certain status to them. The first day has a certain status, the first 3 days have another status, and then the rest of them. So if you weren't there for the first 3, you have to start from the beginning. However, Rabbi Shimon is lenient and says, Rabbi Shimon Omeo, afilu bayom shvi'i bami makom karov monei mahem. As long as you're coming from a close place, then it doesn't matter what day you show up. You could come on the 7th day. You just finish up with them, and that's it. Okay, so he has a very lenient position here. So he's lenient in treifa, and he's lenient here. Now the big debate is going to be, do we hold like Rabbi Shimon, right? So do we hold like Rabbi Shimon? So Rabbi Yochanan said we hold like Rabbi Shimon both in the treifa case and in the avelut case. Amar mandehu. Okay, there's a funny line. Somebody said, we don't know who the somebody is. Somebody. Eske ve'esak ve'egmara l'shmate mipume demara. I wish I want to have the zchut to go to Israel, and not just because I want to make aliyah, but if I could get to Israel and hear Rabbi Abba say this and make sure that it's really the case, I'd be so happy. So in fact, Kislik, when he goes to make aliyah, he finds exactly Rabbi Abba. He goes, he searches him out, I guess. He finds him. Amar Leg says to him, Amar Mara, halakha Rabban Shimon Gamliel b'treifa. Do you hold, like I heard you say, that the halakha is like Rabban Shimon Gamliel in a treifa? Amar Leg, ain't halakha ambre. Okay, this would be boring if it was, yes. So it has to be interesting for them to tell us. So he says, I actually said the halakha is not like Rabban Shimon Gamliel in treifa. Okay, so he continues to ask, Rabban Shimon Gamliel ba'avel mai. What'd you say about avelut? Because I also heard you paskin like him in avelut. Am I wrong about that too? Amalei plugtanin. There's actually a machloket about how to paskin. Deitmar, as it was said, Rav Chisda amar halakha. V'chein amar Rabbi Yochanan halakha, which is what we quoted Rabbi Abba is quoting Rabbi Yochanan before. So Rav Chisda and Rabbi Yochanan are on the side of halakhic Rabban Shimon Gamliel, and Rav Nachman amar ein halakha. Rav Nachman is against them, saying ein halakha. And then the Gemara so you would say majority says halakha, so at least here he sounds like he was right. But the Gemara tells us, ein halakha Rabban Shimon Gamliel b'treifa, halakha Rabban Shimon Gamliel be'evel. So he actually says the halakha here that the Gemara rules about is exactly like Rabbi Abba said, which is we don't hold like him when it comes to treifa, but we do hold like him when it comes to evel. Now, why is there a differentiation? And this line is the topic of Din and Daf this week. Very interesting topic, which is the Amar Shmuel halakha kedivrei hamekel be'evel. Shmuel says we paskin like we always go leniently when it comes to avelut. Okay, so why is this? So one simple reason, and obviously there must be more to it. I didn't have a chance to listen to Din and Daf yet, so can't tell you. But there's obviously some more depth here to the whole topic. And basically, we hold generally that we're going to be lenient when it comes to avelut. The main reason being that avelut is mostly, the whole source of avelut is really rabbinic, or a lot of it is rabbinic, and a lot of it is really custom-based. So we're going to be very lenient when it comes to avelut, but I recommend listening to Din and Daf to hear much more about that topic. Amar of Shimi Barchia. Okay, new topic. So we started today, just to keep where we're up to. We were in the keva. From there we got to the chelav on the keva, and then we made this differentiation about which chelav on the keva will be close up a hole in the keva and which won't. From there we got into something else, closing up something else. The mucus on the intestines. Now we're moving on to something else, which is you have a hole, and you want to test that hole. And you want to see, was the hole, this goes back to a topic we saw yesterday, was the hole from before the slaughter happened, in which case it's a treifa, or possibly the hole just happened now. So now if you paint a wall, and it gets ruined and you want to fix up, right, a little spot, and you do it a few months later, what's going to happen? If you paint just that little spot, it's going to be noticeable because the paint changes over time, right? It doesn't look the same as it did then. So you're going to have a problem. You're going to have to paint your whole wall. So that's what we're going to discuss here. A little bit different, but the fact that that is a consideration. Amar of Shimi Barchia. Mikifim b'bnei me'ayim. You can test out on b'nei me'ayim. So basically, make a hole right now, and then you can compare it to the hole you have. Now, since the hole will change over time, if you made the hole right now and it looks just like the hole that's next to it, then you're going to say, oh, obviously this hole just happened now. Because if it happened before the shechita, it would have already changed the way it looks, just like the paint on the wall. So that's what he says. So you can check. Now we're going to talk about this halakha mikifim in 3 places. Okay, even though we're on the keva right now, we've veered off to the b'nei me'ayim because of the lecha. And from now we're going to talk about mikifim b'nei me'ayim. From there we're going to get to, you can do this in the b'nei me'ayim, you could do it in the lung, and you can also do it in the windpipe. Okay, but then we're going to see some certain limitations in some of the cases. Hanu b'nei me'ayim da'atu l'kamei de Rava. This is, I think, there to make you laugh, but there were b'nei me'ayim intestines that came before Rava. Usually when they use that language, came before, it's usually a person. So obviously the b'nei me'ayim didn't walk and appear in front of Rava, but obviously somebody brought them in front of Rava. And they had a hole, and Rava wanted to check out, was the hole before, was the hole after, so what did he do? Akfinu velo idmu. He made a hole, and they didn't look the same, so he wanted to make it a treifa. Ata Rav Misharshia Beret, but his son Rav Misharshia comes over. Remember yesterday, Yafeh kocha ben v'kocha av. We're going to have another case like this. The son comes over, and what does he do? He doesn't even talk to his father. He just mimashmesh behu. He starts touching where the hole is, touches it a few times, v'idmu, and all of a sudden, magic, it looked exactly like the other hole. Amar lehu le menalacha. He said, "Where'd you get that? Where'd you come up with that trick? Where'd you pull it out from?" Amar le. How many hands do you think handled this before it got in front of you? Right? Obviously, first of all, you don't bring your first question to Rava. You bring it to your local rabbi. The local rabbi brings it to the next guy. Obviously, this must have passed a bunch of hands. A bunch of people had already handled it. And therefore, I wanted to see what, it's not just, right? And here you have to use a little common sense. It's not just that you make a hole, the same thing, but you have to do to the meat what happened to it before. So before there was a hole with a lot of people touching it. Now there's a hole with a lot of people touching it. So now it looks the same. Amar le chakim berei b'treifo ke Rabbi Yochanan. He said, "Wow, my son is so wise in treifo, as wise as Rabbi Yochanan." Right, a moment of nachat for the parent, for the parent. So next, Rabbi Yochanan. So that was the testing, right, by making another similar nekev in the intestines. Now we're going to talk about that you could do this in the lungs. But there are going to be some limitations. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar, the Amrei Travayu, they both said, Mikifim bere'ah, you can do it with lungs as well. But Amar Rava, lo maran ela b'ota aruga, afami aruga la aruga lo. It has to be on the same side. Remember, the lungs have two sides, broken down by the bronchi, the big bronchi in the middle. So it's the left with the left and the right with the right. One on the left and one on the right are not going to necessarily look the same. So therefore, it has to be on the same side. The halakha is afilu me aruga la aruga, and the halakha is even one side to the other. You actually can, not like Rava said. Midaka lidaka umigasa ligasa, from small to small or big to big. It's actually a debate what this means. Some people think small animal to big animal you can compare, but that would be a big jump, because if we were talking about two sides of the same, right, animal, to now jump and say a different animal, just make sure it's the same kind of size animal, that would be a big jump, but maybe. Or it means, if you remember, the lung has lobes, and there's smaller lobes and larger lobes. So maybe they mean small lobe to small lobe, large lobe to large lobe. Okay? Aval, what doesn't work, obviously, migasa l'daka velo midaka l'gasa. But you can't do small to large or large to small. Again, either large or small animal or large lobe to small lobe. Abai v'Rava da'amri travayu, third halacha about mikifim b'kaneh. You can do it in the windpipe. Also there, we're going to see a limitation. Amar Papa lo amaran ela ba'ota chuliya. Aval michuliya lechuliya lo. It has to be the same chuliya. Now chuliya could be one of two things. Either it's a ring. Remember, the windpipe is made up of multiple rings, and it's one, so it has to be within the same ring. Some people say a chuliya, usually it's like a gang is a chuliya. It's a group of them. So it has to be, because as the windpipe, as you go down the windpipe, right, it changes a little bit. So as long as it's in the same grouping of like three, okay, that would be a grouping. So it would have to be within the same grouping. That's possible. And then they say, avalomi chuliya lebar chuliya, avalomi bar chuliya lechuliya. Now what this seems to mean is, I skipped one phrase. Sorry, I'll just start there. The halakha is, now, he didn't mention this bar chuliyah, which we're going to talk about now, which is the area between the chuliyot. So the halakha is afilu mechuliyah lechuliyah. You can actually check from ring to ring or from group to group. Umi bar chuliyah lebar chuliyah, and in between the rings to in between the rings. But obviously, lo mechuliyah lebar chuliyah, v'lo mi bar chuliyah lechuliyah. But you can't put a hole in the in-between part between the rings and compare it to the rings itself, right? Those are very different, what it's going to look like there and what a hole's going to look like there. Okay. Amar Zeiri. Now we're moving on to something else, which is, since we were talking about, again, let's go back. We got sidetracked from the B'nai Me'ayim, we got to this issue of check holes with this test. But really, we were talking about sealing up. So we have the chelev, the kosher, non-kosher, what seals, the mucus that comes out of the intestines that can seal. Now we're going to talk about something else, sealing something else. Chilcholet, which is this duct near the rectum, is Abai Amr Ze'eri says Chilcholet shenikva kshera. If it has a perforation in it, it's no good. It is good. Why is it good? Well, because ho'il v'yirechayim ma'amidot ota. It's basically sitting on the hip bone. Because it sits on the hip bone, that basically protects, it blocks any nekev. Okay, again, we have another thing that covers up a hole. So because of that, it's not a problem. Okay, vikama, okay, how much? Now they're going to say, to how much of the rectum does this apply? Okay, so this is basically, there's a hole in the rectum, that's up against the hip bone, okay, or the hip, not necessarily just the bone, the whole hip holds it up. So the question is, how much of the rectum are we talking about? Because it's not all opposite the hip. So they say, Amar Rabbi Eli, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Makom hadevek birubo, if it's where it's attached, then unless it's perforated majority of it, it's not a problem. Now, if you have a hole, a perforation, anywhere where it's not connected to the hip bone, or to the hip, then it's going to be a problem. Okay? So we basically say like this, and in a minute we're going to change this, but I want you to get it straight before we change it. Any place where the rectum is not by the hip and up against it, well, that makes sense. Any perforation is a problem because, again, this is a place, obviously they're assuming the perforation of anything is a problem, and there's nothing sealing it. But where it seals it, as long as it's not torn the majority, it's fine. Amarua Rabbanan kamei de Rabba, so the rabbis said before Rabba, Mishmei de Rav Nachman. Okay, this happens often where the rabbis tell Rabba something in the name of Rav Nachman, and Rabba has a very strong reaction. So the rabbi said, this is what Rav Nachman said about the rove, and about the, where it's attached and not attached. Amrle, lav miyamina lechu lo titli be buke sriki. Haven't I told you before, don't hang a Rav Nachman empty jugs? Which basically means, don't say that he says stupid things. Okay, he did not say that. There's no way he said that. I know he didn't say it. Because hachi am Rav Nachman, we're now at the top of Amud Bet. This is what Rav Nachman said. Mikoma devek afilu nitil kulo kasher. Where they're sticking into each other, why is it a problem if it's rove? It seals it up. It's not a problem at all. The only thing you need is, in other words, assuming, he says, even you could take the whole rectum, it could be gone. As long as it has a place to hold on to. Vekama, how much is that? Amrabaye kimalo batata b'Torah. He says in an ox, it's just one finger's. Okay, even in a big ox, as long as there's one finger's width there, that's all you need. Okay, the width of your finger. That's it. Okay, now we're moving on. We're done with that. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the kares hapnimit. We're on the next case of the Mishnah. So that finishes up the topic of the keva, even though we got very sidetracked and we weren't on the keva anymore, really. Okay? We got to the chulcholet from there in some other, case, and we got to the mikifin in all different cases, and we got to the mucus on the intestines. So we got far sidetracked because it was all about sealing. Okay, that was the main theme that kept this going, other than the break we had in the middle about the checking holes and by testing and making a new hole. Okay, otherwise it was all about sealing up holes and what seals up what. And that started with the keva because of the fats on the keva and the two different kinds of fats and which one seals, which one doesn't. From there we got into other things that seal up holes. Now we get back to the Mishnah. So the next case in the Mishnah, okay, always worth going back and reading the whole thing. So it talks about the kares hapnimit shenikva. Okay, this is the first stomach you get to. Okay, when it comes straight through the veshet, the gullet into the stomach, and that the kares hapnimit shenikva or shenikra rova chitzona. Okay, either now there's two parts of the kares. There's the inner part and the outer part. We don't know what those are. We're even not going to really know by the time we finish this class because we're going to have 7 different opinions about what the kares hapnimit is, which then whatever isn't the kares hapnimit is by default the kares hachitzoni. And it's very important, the chitzona. the outer one. And it's very important to know the difference because in the pnimi, it's a nekev, a perforation, and in the chitzoni, it's rov. Okay? Then we'll get to Rabbi Yehuda soon. I'll quote it when we get there. He has a bit of a different opinion here. But let's start with the kares hapnimi. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. He'id natan bar shila, reish tabachya de tzipori. He was the head slaughterer in Sipori, lifnei Rebbe. So he testified, right? That's what you need. You need the butchers. They know what they're talking about. He testified before Rebbe Mishum Rabbi Natan. In other words, what happened? He had studied with Rabbi Natan, shchita, right? So he knew, because he uses it all the time, so he's the expert. So he testified. The name of Rabbi Natan, Ezu Kares Pnimit, Sanya Devi. Okay? Sanya Devi, if you have a Gemara with pictures, okay? There's different opinions about what this is. Okay, it's called the sikum. Okay, if that helps you. It doesn't help me, but it's called the sikum. Okay, it's basically, there's different opinions, so I'm going to not go through all of them, but there seems to be a pouch. Okay, it's this pouch in the, here, we'll read it. It's not part of the, by the way, they call the stomach the rumen. But it's a pouch between the small and large intestines where food can accumulate. That's possibly what it is, which isn't even in the rumen, which is interesting because we assumed it was. Okay? But anyway, it's something called the Sanya Devi, which isn't even really in what we would call the first stomach. V'chein amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha Sanya Devi. Okay, so first two people say that's the first opinion. Rabbi Yishmael Amir, Istemucha de Karsa. Okay, Istemucha sounds like stomach. Right? So it's the stomach of the kares. Okay, that's not really clear what it is. Okay, they say it's the translation in the Koran is it's the opening of the rumen. Okay, so somewhere near the opening there. And Rashi says, Ani shamati istimucha belaz ve'eni yodea mahu, but I don't really know what this is. Okay, Rashi admits, I'm not really sure what this is. Rav Asi am Rabbi Yochanan, third opinion, makom tzal yesh bakares ve'eni yodea ezehu. There's some narrow part in the kares, but I'm not sure what it is. Okay, so it's some narrow part. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, nafal krasa bebira. You're going to throw the kares into the pit. In other words, it's very nice that you said this, and I don't know where it is, but then that's going to mean that nobody is going to write any sort of nekev anywhere in the kares is going to ruin them. Like, what are you doing saying that statement where you don't really know what this is, and you're going to make people throw out their any sort of rumen that has any perforation in is going to end up in the garbage. But then, Amar Rav Achabar of Ava, Amar Rav Asi, Mina Meitzar Ulamata. It's where the kares starts to narrow from there down. So that seems to be an explanation of this third one. Okay, so we have Sanya Deve, we have this Istemucha de Karsa, which we're not really sure what that is, and that, although it's somewhere, if you look in the the Steinsaltz translation, it's the entrance to the stomach, and the third is from where it begins to narrow, going down. Number 4. Rabbi Yaakov bar Nachmani Amar Shmuel, makom she'ein bo melat. Place where there's no wool. Okay, what does that mean, wool? What it means is the substance there is like a woolly-like substance, and the place where it doesn't have this woolly-like substance in the stomach is not a problem. Okay, I'm sorry. That where it's not like that, that's where we're going to call it the kares hapnimi, where you have to be much more careful about any sort of perforation. Rabbi Yavina Amar Geneva Mishmei de Rav, fifth explanation. Tefach beveshet samuch lakares, zoi kares hapnimit. It's the tefach in the windpipe that's next to the stomach. So it sounds like it's not even in the stomach, okay, but this actually gets interpreted somewhere else. We saw this where it's, I don't remember where we had this sugya, but we actually explained this, that it really means it's the beginning. It's where the veshet hits into the stomach. It's the first tefach in the stomach. Okay? Amrei b'ma'arava mishum b'Rabbi Yossi b'Rabbi Chanina. In Israel, they had the following interpretation. Kol hakares kulo zoi kares hapnimit. The whole thing is called the pnimi, only other than some little part. Ezu kares hachitzon basar chofet rova kares. It's this flesh that covers the kares, but the rest of it is really called pnimi. And that makes sense, by the way. Chitzoni and pnimi, right? Not all of them made sense, chitzoni, pnimi. Some of them you can sort of explain why, but this one, is the inner part, the whole thing, and then there's this part that covers it. That's the outer. Rabbi Bar Huna Amar, the last interpretation, seventh one, mafra'ata. Okay, my mafra'ata, that didn't really help us. What is the mafra'ata? Amar Rav Avya, heicha de para tabche. It's the part where the tabach cuts. Okay, it seems to be the whole lower part of the kares because when you open the animal, right, when it's standing up, that's the part that kind of is closer to where he cuts, and the part where he cuts, that lower part of the stomach or something like that. It's not 100% clear. I mean, there's pictures that show this, but there's all different interpretations, so pictures only show one thing. It seems to be a large chunk of it where the butcher cuts. So if we started confused, what is the kares pini, what is the kares chitzoni, we're ending up all the more confused because we now had 7 different interpretations as to which is which. You can see why, practically speaking, this would cause a huge problem. So now, b'nahardea avde kerabba barafuna. So in Nahardea, they held by this mifra'ata, which really covers a large part of the kares. It's going to be called the kares hapnimi, according to that opinion. But Amarle Rav Ashi la meimar kol hanishmata tamais. So Rav Ashi says tameimar, what about all the other interpretations? In other words, you're creating a problem because you're holding by one, and then theoretically, it really could be a treifa if any of the other opinions are correct. So how are you doing that? So Amarle, kulu shaychan b'derabba barafuna. The reason I pass like Rabbi Bar Huna is because his includes all the others. So now we have to check this. Does it really include all the others? Again, it's a little hard to say because we don't fully understand all of them, but let's see what the Gemara does with this. Udu Rav Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mai. So let's go back to number 2. It's Demucha de Karsa, which we don't really know what it... I'm sorry. No, my mistake. It's the Makom Tsar Yesh Bakares, and they said we don't know what it is. So if they said we don't know what it is, then how could we possibly say that this covers it? If we don't know what it is, then how's it going to cover it? So they say, no, Amar answers, Per Pirsha Rav Acha Barava. We already have Rav Acha Barava's explanation of it, which is from the bottom where it starts, right, from the place where it starts to get narrow and below that. And that's included in the Mafra'ata. Okay, so we resolve that one. But to Rabbi Yavino, to B'nei Ma'aravamai, what about the last 2, before that last one? Before the Mafra'ata, we have the Tefach Baveshet Hasamuch LaKeres. That's for sure not in the Mafra'ata. That's way up at the top part of the Keres. And Keres. And the other one was... Ma'arava, they said, Kol HaKares Kulo, the whole thing other than the Basar HaChofeh. That's obviously a more inclusive one than this one. So they say, Amar says, Hane Vadai Plige. They definitely disagree with me. Okay, but I have the right to disagree with them, so it's not a problem. Okay. So basically we're going to say that the opinion of Mafra'ata includes everything other than those 2, the Vesha right near the Kares, and the one that said the Kares HaPnimi is really almost everything. Okay, now we get to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah said, and it's a little unclear how to read this, and that's what the Gemara is going to try to figure out. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees and says it's not rov achitzona. He said in a gdola it's tefach, and in a ktana it's biruba. It sounds like what he's saying is, in a large one it's not rov, it's tefach, and in a large animal, and in a small animal it's tefach. So they're basically saying what Tanakama says the kares achitzona is only a problem if it's torn in a tefach, is only in a small animal, but in a big animal it's, rov. The majority is only in a small animal, in a large animal it'll be rov. But the Gemara is going to understand it a little bit differently. Amar Rabbi Ben Yamin Bar Yefen, Amar Rabbi Elazar, lo gdola mamash, v'lo ktana mamash. Don't understand there's large animal, small animal. Ela kol shenikra batefach v'lo haviruba. If it's a tefach, but it's not if it's torn a tefach, but it's not the majority, then zohi sheshaninu bigdola tefach. In other words, if it's so large, this kares achitzona, that a tefach is not a majority, then we're going to go by a tefach instead of a majority. And ruba, v'lo havi tefach, and if you cut the majority of it, but it doesn't even add up to a tefach what was cut, hare zo sheshaninu b'ktana b'ruba, then we're going to go by rov even though it's not a tefach. So basically the way we're going to say this very simply, it's either or, whichever one you get to first. If it's torn a tefach, it's a problem, even if it's not rov. If it's torn rov, even though it's not a tefach, it's a problem. So the Gemara says, Ruba v'lo tefach pshita. Okay, wait. If it's torn rov and there's no tefach, that's obvious. In other words, we already said rov. Why does Rabbi Yehuda need to point that out? Tanakama already said majority. Well, lo tzricha davia tefach b'mashu. What if the whole thing was only a tefach and a bit more? Amau detema, you might have thought, ad mikra b'tefach lo have treifa. Kamash malan. You might have thought it's so small, the kares chitzona, that since it's torn the majority, but it's not even a tefach, it's, a little more than half, maybe that's not a problem at all. Maybe that's not going to make it a treifa. Kamash malan, that's why it's to tell you, no, it's a treifa. In other words, treifa is either rove, even if it's not even a tefach, and of course if it's more than a tefach, and if it's not rove, but it's already a tefach, that's already enough to call it a treifa. So it's either or, whichever you get to first, basically. Amar Geneva, Amar Rabbi Asi. What if nikdera kesela treifa? What if it's not a line? Like we've been talking about a line, nikra ruba. What if it's a hole, like a coin, size of a coin? Okay, and what they mean right now is the shape of a coin. So he says it's a treifa. In what case? If you were to stretch it, it would be a tefach. So let's say you have this big hole, stretch the hole. If it gets up to a tefach or rove, it's going to be a problem. Then comes Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia Baraba, Lididi Mefarshel Minei de Geneva, Amabra de Nahardea. Okay, I was by the banks of the river of Nahardea, and I bumped into Geneva, and he told me, right, again, we're getting this, right, I was in the butcher shop, and I heard this, or I was here. Okay, why they tell us all this, we don't know, but I was there, and Geneva told me himself, Kisela Kshiva, Yatir Mikisela Treifa. What size is going to be a problem? The exact size of a sela, that coin, it's like saying a shekel or a penny. The size of that is a problem. Is okay. But if it's any bigger than that, it's going to be a problem. The kama yater mi b'kasela. So now, how much is more than a sela? So what's the big deal? Just take a sela. Well, they want to tell you in a different terminology because, again, nowadays we would measure it in inches, in centimeters, right? So they didn't have that. So what did they say? Well, they had amod and etzbaod and whatever. They could have done that, but often they describe things in situations. So Amar Rav Yosef could go into island tlat kashiyata betzipa beduchka or below tzipa beravcha. If you take 3 date pits and you put them through the hole, if they have some dates on them and you can kind of just squeeze them through, that will be a sela, like beduchka, not so easily. And if they have no dates on them and it's just the pits and you put the 3 pits in easily, that's a sela. Okay, so do the date trick at home, try to figure out how big that hole is, what it would be like. Okay, finishing up, we're really just going to start this, and we actually saw this yesterday, so it'll be easy to finish up. But the Mishnah then has hemse subeda kosot with any sort of nekev in it. Okay, those are the 2 of the other stomachs. Hemse subeda kosot, but now we're going to see where is there a hole, if you remember. Hemse subeda kosot shenikvu lachutz. You have to have a hole that goes all the way through to the other side. If it doesn't go through to the other side, it's not a problem. And we saw this braita yesterday, the beginning part of this braita. Tanu Rabbanan, machat shenimtzeit be'ovi beit hakosot. If you had a needle in the thick wall of the beit hakosot, if it's mitzad echad, if the needle's only in one side, but it doesn't come out the other side, it's fine, because that's exactly what we saw in the Mishnah. Mishnei tzadim treifa. But if it goes through both sides, it's a treifa. And with that, we finish our daf. We'll talk about the continuation, then what if there was blood there and all that. Okay, that's in tomorrow's daf. So, what did we do? We started with the keva. We got from there to the chimtza, the bar chimtza, the chelav on the keva, and now which one seals, which one doesn't seal a perforation. We got from there to the lecha that seals up the bnei me'ayim, the intestines. From there we got to, you can check a hole in bnei me'ayim by making another one similar. From there we got to you could do it in the lung, you could do it in the windpipe, but there were some limitations. Then we had the cholet that had a hole, but because it's up against the hip, it's fine. Where exactly and all that we discussed. Then we got to the karesa pnimit. We had several different interpretations. What that is, what the inner one is, what the outer one is, which we need to know because inner is any sort of perforation and outer is majority. Then we got to Rabbi Yehuda, who explained the majority. It could be majority or tefach, either one. From there we got to what if it's a round hole, and then we say, well, if it's stretched, it was a tefach, that would work. Again, that's, by the way, only according to Rabbi Yehuda, who thinks tefach. And then we talked about the size, like a sela is fine, but any bigger than that is a problem. And with that, we finish for today, wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom.